that we were going to talk about ketosis and ketogenic diets as far as a way to actually normalize hormones. It's a tool that we use. It's a trick. It's a way to get utilize fat and a lot of the things we talked about. And I call it the advanced cellular healing diet. We have the cellular healing diet where we talk about getting rid of grains and sugars and really increasing fat. I always define that diet as it's a moderate protein diet. High protein is not good. It's a moderate carbohydrate diet. I wouldn't consider it super low because you can eat berries, you can eat as much vegetables as you want, which, there's carbohydrate, nuts and seeds, there's, a lot of different carbohydrates there. I would say as far as what society would consider, they probably would consider it a low carbohydrate diet, but in my eyes it's not. I would say it's moderate, but I do consider it a high fat diet. Well, the advanced cellular healing diet, aka keto adaptation, and we'll talk about what that is. Some of you may not even know what that is, but it is a way. It is better defined as a low carbohydrate diet, moderate protein, just like the cellular healing diet, and an extremely high fat diet. And it works. It works for certain conditions. It works for hormone conditions. And it can be used for a short period of time, and some people choose to stay in it, just like many cultures in the world have and still do, stay in that state. So we'll talk about that today. As far back as the 1920s, they've utilized this state called ketosis, where we can eat a super high fat diet and a super low carbohydrate diet, and we'll give you those parameters in a moment, and put the body in a very unique state of healing. Well, they used it for all types of different brain conditions, and I think it got popular with seizures and how it controlled seizures. And really they used it for many different brain conditions, memory problems, neurodegenerative diseases, whether it's, Parkinson's or, Alzheimer's, who knows. But that was back in the 1920s, and then with the advent of certain new brain medications like Neurontin and others, it kind of was just put to the side. Like, well, we won't need to have to do all that anymore because we have these new drugs. Well, that didn't work out. It really hasn't worked out at all, actually. And so now, in the last few years, with the research of some really bright scientists and what's going on, they're really utilizing the ketogenic diet for multiple different conditions, not even just brain conditions, hormone conditions for one of them, autoimmune conditions for another, and the list is growing. So then what is this tool that we can utilize even to get people that are in severe weight loss resistance burning fat again? Well, look, if you've watched some of our last shows, or past shows, I should say, we've educated you on your cells can only use two things for energy. One, sugar, aka glucose. Two, fat. That's it. So the bottom line is when we put someone in ketosis, or a keto-adapted state, we're forcing their cells to only use fat. Now, the problem with this is the brain can only really use glucose. It can't utilize fat. So what happens is this process is so unique that through the process of burning fat, you actually make something called ketones. In ketones, your brain can use. Well, not only does your brain use them, David kind of spilled the beans a little bit and said, well, actually your brain prefers ketones. Matter of fact, your brain works about 25% better on them. And that's why we see a lot of the healing and the brain healing that takes place. Well, through some more modern day studies now, we know that some other things take place. We used to think when we put someone in ketosis, when in this fat burning state, that they would produce more of fats and certain things in this state. Well, the fact is what happens is because the cells are only burning fat. Let me give you an analogy I think everyone can relate to. If you put coal or wood in your fireplace, you get a lot of smoke. Well, if you burn natural gas from your stove, do you see a lot of smoke? No, it burns much cleaner. Well, that's the way fat burns. Fat burns very, very clean as opposed to sugar or glucose, which burns like wood or coal. There's a lot of byproduct. So when you put someone in a state where their cells are only burning fat for energy, you take away all all these pollutants, we'll just say, in the cell. It's called ROS, reactive oxygen species. but those things can cause inflammation. Our body has to get rid of those things to downregulate that oxidative stress and inflammation. So when we put someone in a state of ketosis, we see a downregulation of cellular inflammation. It's a way of fixing the cell membrane. Well, we've told you in the past is on the cell membrane is where the hormone receptors are. So we know that when we put the cell in this adapted state where it's only using fat, it burns much cleaner. It therefore downregulates all the pollution and the inflammation that the cell is making when it burns energy. So, and the neat thing is the same thing happens in the brain. Ketones burn very clean. It's a very clean source of fuel. So, okay, so that's some of the basic principle of what ketosis is. We're forcing the body to go into a state where it needs fat for energy. How long does it take to get into that state? It takes about 2 to 4 weeks for, depending on the person, to get into that state, where we have to drop their carbohydrate intake, on average, some people less, but on average under 50 grams.
What does that look like, 50 grams, Dr. Pompa, as far as vegetables?
Anybody can go online and Google how many carbohydrates are in broccoli, because yes, you have to measure the carbohydrates even in vegetables, even healthy vegetables. The idea is we're starving down the body of glucose, so it must utilize fat for energy. So we can't get any type of carbohydrate even from good sources because we're switching the cell's energy source. So what does that look like? You could eat a nice big salad. That would probably only be maybe 10, 15 grams of carbohydrates if you ate a really big salad. The average salad's probably under 10 or 10. Of course, meat has 0 carbohydrates. Eggs have 0. Heavy whipping cream has 0. Cheese has 0 carbs. But vegetables, nuts, seeds, yeah, you have to count those. And of course, you can go online and say how many carbs does this have, and there's 1,000 websites that help you do that. It's
so,
pretty
Dr. Pompa, as far as protein, though, you're probably getting to that. Is there some complications there at all?
Yeah, you don't want to. The old Atkins diet, people were just loading up on protein, and protein can rev up the cell, and protein can obviously affect your DNA. High protein is not good. So we don't want to replace our calories with high protein, which many do. You want to replace it with fat. You want, 70, 80% of your calories coming from fat. And we'll talk about some strategies that I give my patients called my 2-2-2 rule to get those fats in there.
Awesome.
But, you want to replace that, pretty much after 25 grams of protein per meal. Again, bigger people can probably tolerate more, smaller people less. But most of the protein is then converted to sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis. So we really don't want to go over 25 grams per meal. I'm always asked the question of how much protein per day. Well, I would say the average person, 150-pound person, anywhere from 50 to 100 grams of protein a day is probably normal. If you're exercising real heavy, could you do 150? Yes, but anything over that is going to be damaging and convert to sugar. But I stay myself under 100 grams, probably more around 50 to 75 is where I stay for 100 gram protein.
This is very different, though, than people are hearing anywhere. This is the 180-degree lifestyle.
Yeah, always, right? Exactly, because we're actually forcing people to eat more fat, and we're dropping the carbohydrate intakes. And again, I think one of the problems we see in studies where people say, well, this study showed that low carbohydrate diets, blah, 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 blah. Well, again, they call low carbohydrate diet, believe it or not, 180 grams of carbohydrates a day. So, none of us listening to this, even when we're not in a ketogenic diet, would eat that many carbohydrates. But yet, that's oftentimes in studies what they call low carbohydrate diet. Also, they look at studies where they don't allow somebody enough time to adapt, keto adapt. So they're looking at the first 2 weeks and getting results. When you can't look at it that way because it takes about 2 weeks to 4 weeks to keto adapt, meaning that in that time your body's still using sugar in the cell, and it's a very difficult process for some people until they adapt. But once you cross that threshold, now you're an efficient fat-burning machine.